Hello and welcome. Welcome to Around the Town with Mark. I am Mark Whalen, your host, and we're always glad to have you tune in and visit with us. Well, today's topic is going to be ghosts. Yes, that's right, ghosts. On Around the Town with Mark, we've been telling you all about the rich history of our area and some of the beautiful historic buildings, particularly that area of Groton Bank, up there high over by the Fort Griswold Monument and Revolutionary War battlefield. Well, a lot of these places also come with strange happenings, paranormal activity. Yes, well, there's a brand new, beautiful book out, Ghosts of Groton Bank, that's going to tell you all kinds of good things about a lot of these happenings and a lot of these historic places. I have two of the authors of this book with me today. Allow me to introduce them to you. I have Hali Keeler and David Rose. David, Hali, please,
Hi, Mark.
welcome to Around the Town with Mark.
Thank you for having us.
Well, let's start out with an overview of this wonderful book. Hali, would you just kind of give us an overview of what the viewers or readers of this book will experience?
What they'll primarily experience, Mark, is the history, the rich history of that area of Groton known as Groton Bank. That is the area roughly bounded by Baker Avenue, Broad Street, Thames Street, and Smith Street. It is on the Thames River, on the bank of the Thames River, which is why it was originally called Groton Bank. And within that period, that area of town, there is a lot of history. Fort Griswold is in that section, and Fort Griswold was the site of the Revolutionary War battle, September 6, 1781, the Battle of Groton Heights. And that was the Revolutionary War battle when Benedict Arnold betrayed the troops, and Fort Griswold was attacked by the British. They were overrun. I'll let David talk about that because that's his specialty. But the history of this whole area informs the book.
And as I mentioned in the introduction, there's a lot of wonderful historic buildings in that area. The Monument House, of course. Mm-hmm. There's the Bill Memorial Library, Mother Bailey House, Avery Cop House. There's just one historic building after another.
Right.
David, tell us a little bit about how this book came to be.
Well, it's funny because before the book ever was thought of being done, a group of us came together and decided to do a ghost tour of Groton Bank, which included the Mother Bailey House, the Avery Cop House, the Ebenezer Avery House, the Fort, and Bill Memorial Library. So all of those folks would meet at the Avery Cop House, and then they would take a tour from there down to the Ebenezer Avery House, which is in the lower section of the fort. Then they'd come up to the top of the fort, and I would tell them about some ghost occurrences that had been spotted at the fort. And then they'd continue on to the Bill Memorial Library and make the circle back to Mother Bailey House.
So, and let's mention the Mother Bailey House. And I think, did you say the proceeds or some
the
of
royalties from the sale of this book will go to the restoration of the Mother Bailey House. The Mother Bailey House was built in 1780. 1782, right. And it was originally built by Dr. Amos Prentice, and he tended the wounded at the battle. And it went through many incarnations. It was eventually lived in and named for, colloquially, as the Mother Bailey House after Anna Warner Bailey, who married the postmaster, Elijah Bailey. And she was the talk of the town during her time. She aided her relatives in finding people who had fallen at the fort. We like to think that she and Dr. Prentice crossed paths at that time because she ended up living in his house. She's most famous for an episode during the War of 1812 when the British ships were off the coast. Everyone who lived in the area was afraid of another massacre like that, which happened during the Battle of Groton Heights. So they all, took off and went inland. and she stayed. And there were people coming. Some of the militiamen were going up and down the streets. They were looking for cannon fodder. Wadding. Cannon wadding. I knew I was going to make that mistake. Cannon wadding. And she came out into the street to see what was going on. And they said, well, we need flannel for wadding. And the story goes that she lifted up her skirt, dropped her red petticoat, flannel petticoat, gave it to him to use for the wadding.
Fascinating story.
It is a great story, right? So over the years, the house has been owned by a number of families that have respected its history. It had fallen into a situation where it was broken up into apartments, and it was not in very good shape. And in the years since, it's fallen into significant disrepair. The city bought it a number of years ago to save it from further deterioration, further destruction. But unfortunately, these houses take a lot of money, yes, and the city just didn't have it. So right now they are trying to find a way to restore it. And there was a task force that the mayor gathered, and I was on the task force, and we made some recommendations as to what grants could be used and various ways that it could be restored. So that's the point where we're at now. The city's deciding what direction to take. The the Anna Warner Bailey chapter of the DAR has also gotten involved, and they're looking into how they can help as well. So the hope is that there will be some restoration in the years to come, and that the royalties from the sale of the book will go to help that. It's a very significant building in our city.
Well, it is, and you know, it sort of goes without saying that any kind of an historic building like that, once it's gone, is irreplaceable.
Yes.
And a lot of these historic buildings make up the fabric of the community and who we are even today.
Yes, absolutely.
And it's a good point to mention that this wonderful book, even though it's titled Ghosts of Groton Bank, it really is a beautifully written history book of this area. And David, tell us a little bit about where the ghosts came in. And instead of just writing a history book, you've introduced another little level of interest in the book.
Okay, well, that all started again with the ghost tours. And then Hali went to a session, a workshop, and happened to see a display of books talking about ghosts. And she thought, well, maybe we could turn our ghost tours into this book. And we all agreed that it was a good thought. I was a little hesitant at first, but we all agreed that any royalty should go to the Mother Bailey House, even though we're from different organizations. The Mother Bailey House is the most important in our thinking.
And where did a lot of the ghost stories that are in this book, where did you compile all of those and gather them to put into the book?
Most of them came from the sites themselves. Everybody had a ghost story, which is how we started the tours, because we were just telling ghost stories. You know, what happened in my building, what happened in your building. And there are, these are not, I won't say first person, because not everybody has experienced them, but they're stories told by people who experienced them in all of our buildings. I also literally knocked on doors in the neighborhood looking for stories, and it felt odd, you know, but I found them. I went in and I found them. And it was by these first person, some by the people who actually experienced them, and some by hearsay. But we just sort of explored all of those stories. So it's all, it wasn't done through second or third hand. It was the stories that we had.
Local tales.
Local tales, exactly.
And
exactly.
I know there's such things in the book as tobacco smoke that shouldn't be there, and doors that open and shut that shouldn't, and radios that are turned on that shouldn't be, a lady in white. So it covers all kinds of really fascinating little bits and pieces, even as simple as a local barbershop that has a ghost story to tell.
Yeah, yeah. That what was Macy's barbershop on Thames Street, a fixture of Thames Street for many years, is now Danielle's. And the staff there have experience. They'll close up for a couple of days and come back and find scissors and other implements have been moved, radios on, and occasionally they sense and sometimes see out of the corner of their eye what they call a man that they actually named, who was one of the previous barbers there, who comes to visit them, according to them. They feel that.
Well, and David, tell us, I know you were going to talk a little bit more about the Fort Griswold. Everybody, most everyone in our area certainly can see that wonderful obelisk from just about anywhere in the area. And I don't know if everybody, our viewers out there, if you haven't visited it, you really should. It's a remarkable battlefield. So tell us a little bit more about the history of that battlefield and, of course, its ghost story.
Okay. All right. Well, the fort, they started building it in 1775 by direction of the governor of the colony to defend the river. And the reason they thought they needed to defend the river is because there were a lot of privateers coming out of that harbor to attack British shipping. And if people don't know what privateers are, they're licensed pirates, licensed by the state to attack British shipping. And it was an ideal spot because the two strongholds at that time were, for the British, were in New York and Newport, Rhode Island. And they were always sending supplies back and forth, so it was really great hunting for the privateers. And so the Fort Griswold was started in 1775, about the same time Fort Trumbull was, but on the day of the battle, on September 6, 1781, Fort Griswold was a strong fortification, while Fort Trumbull was nothing more than an earthwork with cannon behind it to fend off boats. It was open at the back and could not be defended if the British landed or anybody landed. So on Thursday morning, when the ships were spotted, a cannon alarm was given. 2 cannon were fired to warn the inhabitants of New London and Groton that the enemy was in the area. But of course, Benedict Arnold, being from Norwich and also having a business in New London, knew that alarm and had a third gun fired, which signified that a privateer was returning to port with their bounty. So people didn't really know what was going on that morning. Some people just went about their daily tasks because this was like sunup, and now the farmers are going out to their fields to taking care of their animals, whatever they had to do. The shopkeepers are getting ready to open their shops. And so they really didn't know what was going on. Another point to make was there was no garrison at Fort Griswold. They had been furloughed because the colony was having financial problems and couldn't afford to pay them, so they furloughed them or sent them off to other areas to support the efforts. So all that was at Fort Griswold was a complement of sentries who were on alert for sighting of ships, and they had to protect the assets of the fort. So there was nobody really to speak of at the fort. Some people did say, you know, what the heck's going on, and picked up their muskets and went down to the forts on both sides of the river to find out what was going on. So the British landed 800 men on the Groton side of the river and approximately another 800 on the New London side of the river.
A lot of people back in that day.
Their goal was to burn New London in retaliation for the privateers. Benedict Arnold was given information that Fort Trumbull was a very strong fortification and Fort Griswold was not. It was just the opposite. So he was kind of a little bit taken aback by that. But they had, when they arrived at the mouth of the river, they were late getting here. They planned on being here before dawn and being on the ground already, so they wouldn't be spotted. Unfortunately, they ran into a headwind, couldn't get here in time. By the time they got here, the tide was going out and they couldn't come up the river. So they had to land down at the mouth of the river. And Groton at that time was pretty much farmland. But Eastern Point was nothing but marsh and bramble and briars and brush that they had to fight through to get up to Fort Griswold. So it took them some time to get there. And they got there around say around 11 o'clock. By that time, 164 men and a 12-year-old boy were at the fort. And the British came up and demanded the surrender of the fort. And Colonel Ledyard held a council of war. He was in command of both sides of the river, actually. And he had a council of war and realized that 164 men against 800. They didn't have any chance at all.
Not good odds.
And he was going to surrender the fort. But there was a colonel, militia colonel there who promised him if he would hold the fort, he would have him another 300 men in 10 minutes. So with that assurance, Colonel Ledyard decided that they would not give up the fort, and he would hold it and defend it. So they gave the British the word that they would not surrender the fort, and of course they were told at that time that if they had to take the fort by storm, no quarter would be given. And if anybody doesn't know what no quarter means, it means that after they took the fort, anyone who was still alive would be put to death with bayonet or sword.
Oh my!
So but they, that's when Colonel Ledyard said, "I shall not give up the fort. Let the consequences be what they may," expecting 300 more men. Well, they never showed up. Why they didn't show up, I have no idea, but they never came. They might have seen them, the 800 British troops and said, maybe this is not the day. But they didn't show up, and the battle didn't last very long. Colonel Ledyard did ask his men to throw down their weapons when the British did get inside the fort. At the time, according to Stephen Hempstead, only 12 were dead. When the massacre, which continued after they threw down their arms, continued at the end, 88 were dead out of 165.
And what is the ghost story? What is haunting this remarkable battlefield?
Well, you look at
dead guys.
Dead guys.
Yeah.
Well, you
guys.
look at
Okay.
why why do spirits hang around? Because they loved a person and can't bear to leave, or they loved a certain place and can't bear to leave, or something catastrophic happened and they can't understand. Why did this happen? And they find that especially around battlefields, that seems the most prevalent issue is they can't go on because they don't understand what happened. Why did they get left behind? Why did this happen? So that's where they figure that the spirits are there. David Pitkin, who wrote New England Ghosts, came up and investigated the fort. And an interesting thing, after he talked to the person who asked him there, who talked about a man sitting on the stairs of the monument that would disappear and strange happenings in the Monument House Museum, how the motion detectors would go off after the place was empty and there was nobody there, how there were strange incidences at the Hubbard House. He decided that he'd take a look around the fort, and he went and looked at the earthworks. He found the location of Colonel Ledyard's marker there and walked down towards the powder magazine. And as he was walking back, he thought to himself, I wonder if all the spirits have left. And he heard a voice say behind him, you'd be a fool to think so. He turned around and only partially looked because he knew there was nobody there. And he didn't say that out loud. He was just thinking that to himself.
And therein lies. Therein lies the ghost story. It's fascinating.
Yeah.
And I by reading this book, there's a lot of locations that you've mentioned, in different homes and buildings and that type of thing. And tell us a little bit more, Hali. I know there's the lady in white.
She's at the Avery Cop House. There's a lot of activity at the Avery Cop House Museum. It was a house built in the early 1800s, and it has stayed in the family all this time, and it's still an active museum and open. It is now an active museum and open to the public. But there have been a number of sightings of a woman in white in a second-story window looking out. And one of our board members lives next door, and I think he closes his shades at night because he doesn't want to look out and see her. But there have been stories of that, lights being left on the top floor. The top floor was where the Irish servants lived. They brought over Irish girls, immigrants, to serve the family. And at one point, for many of these sites, we brought in the Thames Society for Paranormal Investigation. And when they did an investigation there, when they were on the third floor where the servants are, the investigators, as well as Leslie Evans, who is one of the contributors and couldn't be here today, her daughter was with the investigator. And as they were up there, they heard a female voice say, "Please leave." And they both heard that clearly, figuring that these were young, innocent Irish girls, and a man in their quarters was not acceptable. So, they do have that. I don't know who the woman in white was. She could have been a servant. She could have been somebody who lived in the house. Certainly many generations lived and died in the house.
Well, it's good to make mention that of all the places in the book, and there are so many as I mentioned, a lot of these are places where our viewers, your readers, when they read this book, can actually experience for themselves.
They can visit.
And a lot of the visitors that have gone to these locations have experienced some sort of an unexplained happening.
Certainly in the fort, at Mother Bailey, we did have, excuse me, not Mother Bailey, at the Avery Cop House, we did have a woman say that she passed a gentleman standing there who wasn't there. Because people are sensitive to different things, and so what one may see or feel is not necessarily the same as somebody else may. I don't know that a visitor would notice these things unless they're very sensitive. Though when I was doing research, I did ask the people at Paul's Pasta Shop if they had any experiences, because I thought a lot of these buildings are very old. They've been here for a long time. And the staff there said no, they had nothing to report. But after the book came out, apparently a woman was using the ladies' room and came out and told the manager that there was a ghost in the bathroom. So that's something that nobody else had ever reported, but she felt a presence in the bathroom. Many of the experiences were by people who just live in the neighborhood, in their own homes.
Surely.
As David said, this was all farmland. These houses weren't here. And there's so when you think about it, where there may, the streets go out several blocks, that could very well have been places where soldiers died and dropped where they fell and died. Mm-hmm. And there's a house not far from the fort. It's in the path from the fort to Meridian Street, where there's a house from the 1700s. In fact, when the town was doing some sewer work in the 1950s, I believe, they dug up what I believe were partial remains, including artifacts belonging to a soldier. But a woman whose house was in the path of this used to report hearing boots marching through her basement and the clinking of armament.
Well, it's another good reason for people to get this book, mm-hmm. read this book, because they'll be not only reading about the rich history here, mm-hmm. but that'll give the readers of this book the opportunity to know more about these buildings, mm-hmm. visit these buildings, and if they know perhaps what to look for, the backstories, if you're going to smell some smoke, where there shouldn't be, mm-hmm. Readers of this book might start experience things that they weren't expecting to experience. David, tell us, where is this book available for purchase?
Well, it's on Amazon, it's at Books A Million, and it's at the Bank Square Bookshop in Mystic. Oh,
there we go, right on our screen now, Ghosts of Groton Bank, available at Bank Square Books, Books A Million, and Amazon. Please, everybody, make sure you take note of that. This is, as I said earlier, it's a really fun read. It's a quick read, but there's so much to absorb. When I was reading it, I found myself going back and reading chapters a couple of times because there's so many fascinating facts, and one leads into the other, obviously.
And they're related. There's some repetition because it's the same venue.
Right, but they are all related. And sometimes one story is the background of the next story, and,
Right.
I found that to be particularly interesting in the book. It's well worth everyone. It's well worth the read. It's a really fun book. Do either of you have a favorite ghost or a favorite story in this book that you'd like to share with us briefly?
I would have to share that I'm the former director of Bill Memorial Library, and in the 35 years that I was there, I lost count of how many people would come in and say, "Is this place haunted?" And I'd say, "Oh, not that I know of," because I'm as sensitive as a, post. And after we had the paranormal team come in and do an investigation, I was very surprised to find that apparently we do have a man and two women up in our genealogy room who made themselves known during this investigation through some voice contact, answering questions. And the smell of smoke was corroborated by it's pipe smoke that I used to smell, that other staff members have since and currently do smell, and that was picked up also by the investigators without us having told them that.
Really?
So that has to be my favorite story, because after 35 years there, I never felt a thing. I was very surprised that we've had company all this time.
David, did you have a brief little story as we're closing out the show today?
Well, a brief one. We hold a candlelight vigil Labor Day weekend at the fort to honor those killed. And at our first one, people were turning around as if they felt somebody there with them, and they said they did. And they said it was very eerie. So it appears that they're there.
Any book signings coming up? I know you've had several.
We
Do
have.
you have any more book signings?
Well, we have one on October 23rd at Bank Square Books in Mystic.
Okay, October 23rd, Bank Square Books, book signing. Okay, mark it down, everyone.
There will be one or two events at the Avery Cop House on the 27th and 28th. They may be sold out. You'll have to call. That will give a tour of some of the haunted sites in that house.
And I would imagine our viewers could go to the websites of a bookstore or the Avery Cop House and get some of that information. Well, I want to thank you both for being my guests today on Around the Town with Mark. Ghosts of Groton Bank, everyone. You've just had 30 minutes of what a great book this is. It's a fascinating read. Again, it's a great history book. It's full of all kinds of history of the area, plus those fascinating ghost stories. Go to one of those locations, get this book, and remember that it also is helping support the Mother Bailey House, which is a remarkable antique building in Groton as well. Visit all these sites, get this book, read it. I want to thank you for tuning in to Around the Town with Mark today. It's been a fun show. I want you to enjoy the Halloween upcoming. Get this book. It's a great ghost book, great for Halloween. Thanks again for watching us on Around the Town with Mark, and we'll see you back here again very soon.